People-pleasing has nothing to do with being kind. That is not an accusation. It is actually the most clarifying thing anyone can say about this pattern. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. Because there is a version of being kind that costs you nothing. It comes from a full place. It gives because giving feels like an expression of who you are. And then, there is something else. Something that looks identical from the outside but operates on completely different fuel. That is what this video is about. Not to take something from you. Not to tell you that your care for other people isn't real, but to give you the most useful thing available right now, a precise name for what has actually been running. You know the feeling of composing a message 3 times before you send it. Not because you don't know what you want to say, because you are running it through a filter first, checking the tone, softening the edges, making sure it lands without creating friction. And then you send the version that is easier for the other person to receive. Not the version that was true. You know what it's like to laugh at something that wasn't funny, because the alternative, a moment of silence, a flat expression, felt like a risk you weren't willing to take. You know what it's like to say yes to something while something in your chest quietly says no. And then spend the next 3 days managing the resentment that nobody asked you to feel because nobody knew you said yes against yourself. You know the particular exhaustion of a social interaction that went well by every external measure. People smiled, nobody was upset, you kept the peace, and coming home feeling somehow more depleted than if it had gone badly. That is not the exhaustion of someone who gives too much. That is the exhaustion of someone who has been working the entire time. Here is the question that this video is actually asking. What were you working so hard to protect? Because it wasn't them. Now, to better understand what is really driving this pattern, let's look at the mechanism underneath it. People-pleasing is not a personality type. It is not evidence that you are naturally selfless. It is not even at its core about other people. It is a self-worth regulation strategy. And that distinction is everything. Here is what the research on this pattern consistently shows. People-pleasing behavior is most strongly correlated not with high empathy, though empathy is often present, but with anxiety about social evaluation. The driving engine is not love for others. It is the need to control how others feel about you so that you feel safe. That is a completely understandable need. It is also a completely different thing than kindness. At some point, often early, sometimes not, you learned that your security in a relationship was not unconditional, that it was responsive, that when you managed the other person's experience carefully enough, stayed agreeable, stayed useful, stayed easy, the relationship felt stable. And when you didn't, something shifted in a way that felt dangerous. So the part of you that learned to protect itself this way built a system, a monitoring system, one that runs constantly in the background of every interaction, checking, are they okay with me right now? What do they need from me to stay okay with me? What do I need to adjust? You were not born with this. The part of you that learned to manage other people's emotional states was not making a mistake. It was making the only safe move it could see. The problem is not that the system exists. The problem is what it has been costing you to keep it running. Because here is what the system requires. It requires that your real response, your actual opinion, your real boundary, your honest feeling gets filtered before it reaches anyone. Which means that in most of your relationships, most of the time, people are not responding to you. They are responding to the version of you that has been pre-approved for their comfort. And somewhere underneath that, the part of you that never gets to come forward is keeping a very quiet, very accurate record. This is where things get important, because the cost of this pattern runs deeper than most people realize. There is a specific grief that comes with this pattern, not a loud grief, a quiet one. The grief of not being sure how much of what you've given was actually you giving, and how much was you managing the risk of what would happen if you didn't. The relationships you have worked hardest to maintain. Think about them for a moment. How much of the stability in those relationships came from you absorbing things you shouldn't have absorbed? Agreeing to things that cost you, softening yourself at the edges so the relationship could stay smooth. And in those relationships, how known do you actually feel? This is the invisible cost of people-pleasing that nobody talks about. It doesn't just exhaust you, it isolates you. Because the version of you that other people experience, the agreeable one, the easy one, the one who never makes things difficult, that version is not you. It is your protection strategy, and the deeper the protection strategy runs, the longer the distance grows between the relationships you have and the feeling of actually being known in them. You can be surrounded by people who care about you and still feel completely alone. Not because the care isn't real, but because the person they care about is a carefully managed performance of you, and you have been performing for so long, you have started to forget which parts were the performance and which parts were real. That is the cost. Not the occasional yes when you meant no. Not the softened message. The accumulated distance between who you are and who you've been allowing anyone to see. You have been paying for this with things that mattered. If what this video is naming feels familiar in a specific way, if the validation seeking underneath the giving is something you want to understand completely, not just recognize, there is a resource in the description built for exactly that. It goes deeper into why this pattern formed, why it's so hard to interrupt, and what it actually takes to build the internal anchor that makes it unnecessary. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Let's move on and examine what actually changes when you begin to see this clearly. Here is what does not happen next. You do not decide to stop caring about people. You do not swing from people-pleasing to deliberate indifference. You do not become someone who stops thinking about how their actions land. That is not what this is asking of you. What changes when you see this clearly is not what you do, it's what you know about why you're doing it. Because there is a difference, a real, felt difference between choosing to make something easier for someone because you genuinely want to, from a place that doesn't cost you anything, and managing their emotional state because some part of you believes your value depends on their ongoing approval. One of those is kindness, the other is the pattern. And the question that starts to interrupt the pattern is not, should I say this? It is a quieter question, one you can ask in real time, in the space of a breath. Am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? You don't have to answer it perfectly. You don't have to act on it immediately. You just have to start asking it, because the pattern doesn't break in a single moment. It breaks in 100 small moments where you catch it a few seconds earlier than you used to, where you notice the filter running, where you feel the pull to manage, and you pause long enough to ask whether this is coming from care or from fear. That pause is not selfishness. That pause is the beginning of something that actual kindness can grow from, because genuine generosity, the kind that doesn't leave resentment behind, the kind that doesn't accumulate a private cost, can only come from someone who is not afraid of what happens when they take up their full space. You cannot give freely from a place of scarcity. You cannot offer something real when the real thing has been filtered out before it arrives. The goal is not to become less caring. The goal is to become someone whose care is no longer contingent on what it earns you. That is a completely different thing to aim for. And it is available to you, not all at once, but it is available. If this opens something you want to go further with, the resource in the description goes deeper into the mechanism, why the pattern formed, and what actually interrupts it. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. When you think about your own people-pleasing, what does it cost you most? The resentment, the invisibility, or something else entirely? You are not a people-pleaser because something went wrong with you. You are someone whose nervous system learned, at some point, that keeping other people comfortable was the safest way to keep yourself safe. That was not a mistake. That was an intelligent adaptation to a real set of circumstances. And the fact that you're watching this video, the fact that something in the title created enough friction to make you look, means that some part of you already knows the original circumstances have changed. That the threat the system was built to manage is not in every room you enter anymore. That the people in your life right now may be capable of more than the careful version of you has ever allowed them to show. You have been managing this for a long time, largely alone, in the quiet space between what you actually felt and what you let reach the surface. That is not a character flaw. That is someone who has been carrying something real and doing it with a level of care that deserved to be turned inward a long time ago. What you leave this video with is not a fixed self. It is something more useful than that. It is a name. A precise, accurate name for the mechanism that has been running underneath what you've been calling your personality. And a pattern with a name is a pattern you can see coming. A pattern you can see coming is a pattern you can interrupt. You were not born performing. You learned to, which means the kindness that lives underneath the performance, the real version, the one that doesn't cost you yourself, was never gone. It was just waiting for you to stop managing long enough to let it come forward. You already know something shifted. That is not nothing. That is where it starts.